You think you know your family, don't you? You raise them, you love them, you pour your whole damn life into them. You see them at holidays, all smiles and hugs, and you think, this is my legacy, this is what remains. Let me tell you something I learned at the very end of my long, long road. You don't know them, not at all. Not until you're lying in a hospice bed, listening to the quiet beep, beep, beep of your own heart, and you see that look in their eyes. It's not love, it's not grief, it's assessment. They're calculating the square footage of your soul. My name is Arthur Salisbury, but my grandchildren, back when they were sweet, called me Grandfather Sally. And this is the story of how I learned the true price of my legacy, and how I made sure in my final hours that every single one of them paid it in full. It started, as these things often do, with a diagnosis. The big C, it had set up shop in my lungs, a squatter I couldn't evict. So I made my peace. I really had. I was ready to close my eyes and drift away on a sea of morphine and memory. But my children, my three wonderful vultures, Brenda, Mark, and Kyle, they had other plans. They descended upon my quiet little world not with comfort, but with a spreadsheet of their expectations. My house, my beloved old Victorian with its creaky floorboards and a lifetime of secrets, to them, it was just a parcel of land, a teardown. My antique watch collection, the one I'd painstakingly built with my father, just assets to be liquidated. They didn't see a home, they saw a portfolio. I felt the shift in the air, a chilling draft that had nothing to do with the window being open. It was in the way Brenda, my eldest, would tidy my study, her eyes scanning for documents, her fingers tracing the spines of my ledgers. It was in Mark's constant nervous chatter about estate tax efficiencies and probate avoidance. And Kyle, my youngest, my wild card, his greed was the purest, the most honest. He'd just sit there, staring at a painting on the wall, and I could see the dollar signs reflected in his glassy eyes. The love, the genuine affection, had been slowly replaced by a patient, polite avarice. It was a poison seeping into my final days. The breaking point, the moment the last fragile thread of my paternal denial snapped, came on a Tuesday. I was pretending to be asleep in my recliner in the den, the afternoon sun warm on my face. Brenda and Mark were in the kitchen, their voices a low, carrying murmur. They thought I was too far gone to hear. "We have to get him to finalize the will," Brenda said, her voice like sharpened steel. "Dr. Evans said it could be any day now. Any day. And that idiot Kyle is still talking about taking him to a damn ball game. He'll confuse him, get him to change something." Mark's voice, always so reasonable, so smarmy. "We'll handle it, Bren. We just need to present a united front. A simple, clean division. The house gets sold, the proceeds split 3 ways. The rest, we can figure out the rest." "Figure it out? Mark, there's nothing to figure out. There's the Cadillac, the investments, the collections, and then there's the real money. The stuff Mom's family had. He's never told anyone where he put it. We need to find it before he's gone, or that waste of space Kyle will sniff it out and bleed it dry on his schemes." I felt my heart crack then, not from disease, but from a profound, soul-crushing loneliness. They weren't worried about my pain, my peace. They were worried about Kyle getting a bigger slice of a pie they were already carving up over my still-breathing body. My own children, my flesh and blood. In that moment, the man who had raised them, who had bandaged scraped knees and toasted their weddings, died. What was left was just a husk with a plan. A beautiful, terrible plan. I called them to my bedside the next morning. The hospice room was sterile, beige, the air thick with the scent of disinfectant and dying flowers. They filed in, their faces masks of concern so expertly crafted I almost believed them. Brenda adjusted my blanket. Mark poured me a glass of water. Kyle just stood by the door, looking uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Children," I began, my voice a fragile whisper. I made a show of it, a painful cough, a weak hand gesturing them closer. I don't have much time left." "Don't say that, Dad," Brenda said, but her eyes were bright, alert. A shark-smelling chum. "I need to tell you something," I wheezed. "A secret I should have told you long ago. Your mother and I, we didn't trust banks, not with everything." I let that hang in the air, saw their spines stiffen. There's a fortune not in stocks or bonds, real, tangible, hidden away in this house. You could have heard a pin drop. The greed in that room became a physical presence, thick and suffocating. "Where Dad?" Mark asked. His voice hushed with a reverence he never showed for me, only for my potential wealth. I looked at Brenda, my eyes wide with manufactured desperation. "Brenda, my rock for you. The heart of the house is where you'll find the heart of the treasure. The old coal chute in the basement. Behind the false brick at the back. It's all there. Gold coins, your mother's jewels, everything." Brenda's face went pale, then flushed with a triumphant, vicious joy. She didn't even kiss my forehead. She just squeezed my hand, a bone-crushing grip of excitement, and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." And she was gone, her sensible heels clacking a frantic rhythm down the hall. I turned to Mark. "Mark, my smart boy, you always loved puzzles. It's not in the basement. That was a test for your sister. The true cash is in my study. The floorboards beneath the Persian rug. Third board from the west wall. Pry it up. You'll find bearer bonds, enough to set you up for life." Mark's eyes gleamed. He'd always thought himself smarter, more deserving than his sister. He patted my arm. "Knew you'd see reason, Pop, knew it." And he was off, practically sprinting, no doubt already mentally spending his windfall. Finally, I looked at Kyle, poor, lost Kyle. His eyes were wide, hurt, watching his siblings abandon him. "Kyle," I coughed again, reaching for him. "They'll never find it, they're fools. The real treasure, the crown jewel, is buried in the greenhouse. Under the flagstone at the base of the rosebush, your mother's favorite. It's a lockbox. The combination is your birthday. It's all for you, son, all for you." The hope that blossomed on Kyle's face was the most painful thing I'd ever seen. It was pure, unadulterated faith. He leaned down, kissed my cheek, a tear actually falling onto my face. "I won't let you down, Dad. I'll make you proud." And then he, too, was gone. And just like that, I was alone. The great-grandfather Sally, abandoned in a sterile room for the promise of cold, hard cash. The silence they left behind was deafening. A roaring void where the sounds of a family should have been. I let the silence wash over me for a full minute, the hurt a fresh, sharp agony. But then I slowly, carefully reached over to the side table. My hand, which had trembled so convincingly for them, was now steady as a rock. I picked up the small, discreet digital video camera I had positioned on the bookshelf. Its little red recording light a steady, unwavering eye. I pressed stop. And then I began the real work, the work of a ghost. I had my lawyer, Old Man Henderson, a man as dry and trustworthy as dust, bring in the editing equipment. Together in that hospice room, we crafted my masterpiece. We spliced the video. First, the shot of me looking frail and heartfelt, giving each of them their secret. Then we cut to the empty hallway outside my door, the timestamp in the corner ticking away the minutes. 5 minutes, 10, 30, an hour. We showed the security feed from my house, a frantic montage of my children tearing their childhood home apart. Brenda, covered in coal dust, heaving a sledgehammer at the basement wall. Mark, on his hands and knees, splintering the beautiful oak floorboards in my study. Kyle in the greenhouse, his hands bloody and torn from digging up the rosebush, a look of manic desperation on his face. We edited it all into a seamless, damning narrative of abandonment. And as I lay there watching the screen, a profound and icy calm settled over me. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, my final lesson to them. The reading of the will was held a week after my funeral. I'd chosen the venue, the grand oak-paneled library of my own home, the very house they had so eagerly ransacked. They were all there, Brenda in a severe black dress, Mark in a tailored suit, Kyle looking rumpled and exhausted. They couldn't even look at each other. The air was thick with mutual suspicion and the sour stench of their shared, fruitless labor. Old Man Henderson stood before them, a sealed envelope in his hand. "Before we begin with the last will and testament of Arthur Salisbury," he intoned, "the deceased left strict instructions for this to be played." He slotted a flash drive into a large monitor on the wall. The screen flickered to life. And there I was in my hospice bed, but I looked different. The feigned weakness was gone. My eyes were clear, sharp, and filled with a deep, weary disappointment. "Hello, children," my recorded voice began, and the shock in the room was palpable. Brenda gasped. Mark's jaw tightened. Kyle just stared, his face a mask of confusion. "If you're watching this, then I am gone. And you have just spent the last days of my life on a wild goose chase." I let that sink in, watching their faces on the screen as my own face in the present began to pale. "There is no gold in the coal chute, Brenda. No bonds under the floorboards, Mark. And no lockbox under the roses, Kyle. There never was." The video then cut to the montage, their abandonment, their frantic, destructive search. They saw themselves, in all their greedy glory, ripping their inheritance to shreds for a phantom treasure. The room erupted. "He played us," Brenda shrieked, standing up so fast her chair screeched back. "The miserable old bastard played us." "You knew," Mark snarled at Kyle. "You knew it was a trick, and you let us make fools of ourselves." Kyle just shook his head, his eyes glued to the screen, a dawning horror in them. "No," he told me. "He said it was for me." On the screen, my face returned, calm and final. "You were not there for my final breath. You were not there to hold my hand. You were too busy clawing at shadows. So my legacy will be divided not by the blood in your veins, but by the humanity I saw or failed to see in your hearts in my last hours. The entirety of my estate, the house, the investments, everything will be liquidated. The funds will be placed in a trust. And the distribution will be determined by a single factor: the order in which you return to my bedside after you realize the treasure was a lie." The recording showed a final, heartbreaking shot. The empty hallway outside my hospice room, the digital clock ticking away the hours. 1 hour, 2, 6, 12. No one ever came back. My recorded voice delivered the final, crushing blow. "The trust will be distributed as follows. To Brenda, who returned first, which is to say, never, you receive $1. A single dollar for a single moment of loyalty you could not spare. To Mark, who also never returned, you receive $1. And to Kyle, my last hope, who also chose dirt and delusion over his dying father, you receive $1. The screams, the cries of betrayal, the sheer, unvarnished rage that filled my library then was a symphony to my departed ears. But they weren't done yet. The video had one final revelation, a twist of the knife I had saved for this very moment. "The remainder of my estate," I said, a faint, grim smile touching my lips. "Every last penny, every stock, every single asset that you so desperately coveted, I leave to the one person who showed me unconditional loyalty in my final years." The screen cut to a live feed from the security camera in the room itself, zooming in on the corner where she sat, quiet and unassuming, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. To Sarah, my day nurse, who treated me not as a paycheck but as a human being, who held my hand when I was afraid, who read to me when I was lonely, and who was with me, and only with me, when I took my very last breath. And as my 3 children turned, their faces contorted in a fury beyond anything they had ever felt, their eyes landing on the woman they had treated as hired help, as invisible, the screen went black, leaving them in a silence more profound and terrible than any they had ever known, and with the chilling realization that the game was over and they had lost everything. So there they were, my 3 children, my legacy, standing in the ruins of their own greed. The screen went black, and for a single, breathtaking second, the library was utterly silent. It was the quiet of a tomb, the tomb of their expectations. I wish I could have been a fly on that wall to see the exact moment the truth, in all its terrible, final weight, crushed them. But I arranged the next best thing. You see, old man Henderson wasn't just there to read the will. He was there to observe, and he had instructions to tell me everything. Every twitch, every sob, every cry of rage. He was my eyes and ears from beyond the grave. That silence didn't last. It was Brenda who broke it, of course. Her voice wasn't a shriek anymore. It was something lower, something venomous and cold, drilled straight from the frozen core of her. This is not legal, she spat, stabbing a finger toward the now dark screen. This is coercion. This is the rambling of a sick old man who wasn't in his right mind. We will contest this. We will take this apart piece by piece. Mark was packing, a caged animal in a tailored suit. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, ruining it. A nurse. He left everything to a nurse. Do you have any idea what you've done? He whirled on Sarah, who sat perfectly still in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small and terrified, and yet there was a dignity to her stillness that made my children look like shrieking carrion birds. You manipulated him. You isolated a dying man. We'll see you in court, you gold digger. But it was Kyle I was most interested in. Henderson told me he didn't move. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He was staring at the Persian rug on the floor, the one his brother had ripped up, the edges still frayed and curled. The physical evidence of their folly. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, stripped raw. He was alone, Kyle whispered. The words cut through Brenda and Mark's sputtering fury. We left him there, we all did. Oh, don't you start with that now, you hypocrite, Brenda snarled, turning her fury on him. You were just as bad, digging up Mother's roses with your filthy hands. You looked the most desperate of all. He told me it was for me, Kyle's voice cracked, rising in pitch. He looked me right in the eye and he said, it's all for you, son. I believed him. I felt sorry for you too. I thought I'd won. He let out a wet, choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. God, what idiots we are. I felt a pang then, listening to Henderson's recounting. A father's pang, deep and ancient. Because in that moment, Kyle wasn't talking about the money. He was talking about the lie. The personal, intimate betrayal. He was the only one who seemed to feel the loss of me, and not just the loss of the fortune. But even that feeling was quickly swallowed by the storm. The scene devolved into chaos. Henderson described it as a three-way war, each of them lashing out, their shared shame curdling into mutual blame. Brenda was all cold, litigious threat. Mark was calculating the angles, already trying to find a loophole. And Kyle was just breaking apart, his anger directionless, his grief a tangible thing in the room. But the real twist, the first revelation of this new act in my little play, was about to land. Henderson cleared his throat, a dry, lawyerly sound that demanded attention. There is, he said, his voice cutting through the din, a codicil, an addendum to the will that was triggered upon the playing of that video. They froze, all three of them. You could see the desperate, pathetic hope flare in their eyes again. Maybe it was another test. Maybe I'd relented. Maybe the treasure was real after all. What is it? Mark asked, his voice hushed. Henderson put on his reading glasses. The terms of the trust, leaving $1 to each of you and the remainder to Miss Sarah, stand. They are unassailable, I assure you. Your father was of sound mind and the documentation is impeccable. However, he let that word hang in the air, a tantalizing thread. Arthur stipulated that the three of you are to remain in this house for the next 72 hours, together. The outrage was immediate. You can't be serious, Brenda barked. This is my house, was my house. It is now part of the estate bequeathed to Miss Sarah, Henderson corrected calmly. And these are the conditions. The doors will be locked. The phones and internet have been disabled. Your personal devices will not work here. Your father had a signal jammer installed. There is a landline that will be activated only in case of a genuine medical emergency, the determination of which will be made by a remote medical service I have on retainer. Kyle actually laughed, a bitter, broken sound. He's locking us in, like children. He is providing you with an opportunity, Henderson said, and I could imagine the faint, disapproving twist of his lips. In the basement, where Brenda so diligently searched, you will find that the false brick at the back of the coal chute has been repaired. Behind it now is not coal, but a small refrigerator and a pantry, stocked with enough food for 3 days. There are sleeping bags in the study. The water still works. This is insane, Mark yelled, his composure finally shattered. This is unlawful imprisonment. It is a condition of you receiving the $1. Henderson said, his voice like iron. "If any of you leave before the 72 hours are complete, you forfeit your inheritance. All of it." The genius of it, if I do say so myself, was the $1. It was nothing. It was an insult. But it was also a symbol. To forfeit it was to admit, finally and completely, that you never cared about me at all, not even enough to claim the token of my contempt. It was a hook, baited with their own pride. And they all took it. Brenda, because she was too proud to be seen to walk away from even $1. Mark, because his lawyerly mind was already whirring, thinking this was all some elaborate puzzle he could still solve. And Kyle, I think Kyle stayed because, on some level, he knew he deserved the punishment. Henderson left them there. He told me the last thing he saw was the three of them, standing in the wreckage of the library, surrounded by the physical proof of their avarice. The splintered floor, the dusty footprints from the basement, the ghost of their mother's rosebush lingering in the air, locked in a prison of my making. The first few hours, Henderson reported via the security system I'd left active and monitoring, were spent in sullen, separate silence. Brenda claimed the master bedroom, my bedroom, as her territory. Mark barricaded himself in the study, despite the hole in the floor, poring over the few books I'd left on the shelves, looking for a clue, always looking for a clue. Kyle just wandered the house. A ghost in his own childhood home. He'd pause in the doorway of my hospice room, which was now just an empty, sterile space. He'd run his hand over the mantelpiece in the living room. He was looking for something, too, but it wasn't treasure. The first major conflict erupted over dinner. The food I'd left for them wasn't exactly gourmet. It was cans of baked beans, soup, and powdered milk. The kind of stuff you buy for a hurricane. A final, petty insult from beyond the grave. They were in the kitchen, a room that had once been filled with the smell of my wife's cooking and the sound of their laughter. Now, it was filled with the metallic clang of a can opener and Brenda's simmering rage. "I'm not eating this slop," she declared, pushing a can of bean and bacon soup away from her as if it were toxic. "Well, the five-star restaurant is closed, Brenda," Kyle muttered, stirring his own pot on the stove. "Unless you want to eat the drywall you smashed in." "This is your fault," she snapped, whirling on him. "If you hadn't been such a useless drain on him his whole life, maybe he wouldn't have felt the need to pull this monstrous stunt." "My fault," Kyle laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You were the one he called his rock. His rock. You were out of here before his last cough had even finished echoing." Mark intervened, playing the weary peacemaker. "Arguing isn't going to change anything. We need to think. There has to be a reason for this. The 72 hours. The lockdown. He's testing us again. There's another secret here. A real one." "Oh, for God's sake, Mark, give it a rest," Brenda yelled. "There is no treasure. There's just this pathetic, posthumous power trip from a bitter old man." "He wasn't bitter until we made him that way," Kyle shouted, slamming his hand down on the counter. The pot jumped, splashing hot soup onto his hand. He didn't even flinch. "We did this. Don't you get it? We killed whatever was left of our father before the cancer even got a chance." The room went quiet. Kyle was breathing heavily, clutching his scalded hand. The truth of his words hung in the air, too heavy for any of them to bear for long. "This is what he wants," Mark said quietly, his eyes narrowed. "He wants us to fight. He wants to prove his point from beyond the grave. Well, I won't give him the satisfaction." But he was wrong. That wasn't the point at all. The fight was just the opening act. Later that night, the second twist arrived. The lights in the house were on a timer, another one of my little adjustments. At precisely 10 p.m., they all shut off, plunging the house into absolute darkness. And then a single light came on. The old projector in the library, the one I used to use to show slides of our family vacations. It flickered to life, casting a grainy black and white image onto the wall. It was home movie footage. Their mother, Eleanor, young and beautiful, was laughing, chasing a toddling Brenda across the lawn. The sound of her joy, a sound they hadn't heard in over a decade, filled the dark library. Brenda, who had been reading on the sofa, let out a small, choked cry. The scene changed. Mark, at 8 years old, beaming with pride as he held up a spelling bee certificate. I was next to him, my arm around his shoulder, squeezing him with a pride so vast it was visible even in the shaky film. Mark, who had come to the doorway, looked away, his jaw tight. Another change. Kyle, maybe 6, sobbing over a scraped knee. Alina was kissing it better, and then I swooped in, lifting him onto my shoulders, making him laugh through his tears, his small hands gripping my hair. From the hallway in the darkness, Henderson told me he heard a single, muffled sob. It was Kyle. The montage went on for 20 minutes. A relentless, beautiful, heartbreaking parade of our life. Christmases, birthdays, lazy Sundays. The love was so palpable, so real, it was like a physical blow. This was the real treasure. This was what they had been so eager to discard for the cold promise of money. I was holding up a mirror to the ruins of our family and forcing them to look at what had been lost. When the projector finally shut off, leaving them in darkness once more, the silence was different. It wasn't sullen, it was grieving. The next day, the dynamic had shifted. The open hostility was gone, replaced by a heavy, awkward silence. They moved around each other like ghosts. Brenda actually helped clean up the breakfast dishes. Mark offered Kyle a bandage for his burned hand. Small, tentative things, but the damage was too deep for a few home movies to heal. It was on the second afternoon that Kyle, in his restless wandering, found it. He was in the attic, a place filled with the detritus of a lifetime. Trunks of old clothes, my wife's hope chest, boxes of forgotten toys. And tucked inside my old army footlocker, under a stack of yellowing letters, was a small, leather-bound journal. My journal. He brought it down to the library, where Mark was futilely trying to fix the floorboard, and Brenda was staring out the window. "What's that?" Mark asked, his voice wary. "I don't know," Kyle said, his voice thick with a new emotion. Not greed, not anger, fear. "It's Dad." He opened it. The first page was dated just a month after my diagnosis. He began to read aloud, his voice unsteady. "The doctor confirmed it today. The cancer is inoperable. I have months, maybe a year. I told the children." Brenda asked about the DNR order. Mark started talking about power of attorney. Kyle didn't say anything. He just looked at the door like he already wanted to be out of it. I felt small, an item on their to-do list. Kyle's voice broke. He kept reading. "They think I don't hear them. They think I'm already gone." Brenda and Mark were in the kitchen today talking about liquidating the non-performing assets. I am a non-performing asset. My own life, my memories, my love, it's all just a balance sheet to them. Page after page, I had chronicled my own dissolution. Not just the physical fatting, but the emotional abandonment. The way their visits grew shorter, their questions more pointed, their eyes constantly assessing my decline. I wrote about the pain of hearing them argue in the next room about who would get the Cadillac. I wrote about the deep, shameful hope that one of them, just one, would see me as their father again, and not a vault soon to be cracked. Kyle was weeping openly now, tears dripping onto the old pages. Brenda had turned from the window, her face ashen. Mark had stopped pretending to fix the floor and was just sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. Kyle read the final entry, dated the day before I called them to my bedside to give them their secrets. "I have decided. If they want a treasure hunt, I will give them one. But the prize won't be gold or bonds. The prize will be the truth of what they did. The truth of what they became. And maybe, just maybe, if they are forced to see it, to live in the wreckage of it for a while, one of them might remember the people they were supposed to be. It's a foolish hope, a dying man's fantasy, but it's the only legacy I have left to give." Kyle closed the book. The sound was final, like the closing of a coffin lid. No one spoke for a very long time. The journal did what the anger and the home movies could not. It forced them to see the world through my eyes. To feel the slow, excruciating pain of being erased by the very people you built your world for. As the second night fell, something in the house had changed. The tension was still there, a live wire, but it wasn't aimed at each other anymore. It was turned inward. They were alone with their shame. And that's when the final part of my plan swung into motion. At midnight, a low, melodic chime echoed through the house. It came from the library. They all gathered there, drawn by the sound. On the monitor, which had been dark since the will reading, a single line of text glowed white against a black screen. The first lock is opened with an apology, not to me, to each other. Brenda, Mark, and Kyle stared at the screen, then at each other. The last vestiges of their pride were a fortress around them. An apology, after all that had been said, after all that had been done. The screen went blank for a moment, and then another line appeared. The clock is ticking, you have 1 hour. And underneath, a digital counter appeared, the red numbers stark and ominous. 59, 59, 59, 58, 59, 57. They were trapped not just by my design, but by the last and most difficult challenge I could set for them. The challenge of humility. The challenge of admitting their own failings, not as heirs, but as human beings. The seconds ticked down, each one a hammer blow on the brittle shell of their egos. Who would break first? And what would happen if none of them did? The game was entering its final, most desperate phase. So there they were, my 3 children standing in the dim light of the library, watching that clock count down the seconds of their final test. 59 minutes, 58. The numbers bled away, red and accusatory, an apology, such a simple thing. But for them, after a lifetime of competition and 2 days of exposed venom, it was the hardest thing in the world. It was easier to swing a sledgehammer, easier to splinter floorboards than to utter a single, genuine, "I'm sorry." The silence was thick, brittle. You could feel the pressure building in the room, a psychic steam about to blow. Brenda stood ramrod straight, her arms crossed, a fortress of resentment. Mark was packing again, but it was a nervous, bird-like packing, his mind racing through scenarios where this was just another puzzle, another trick. And Kyle was just looking at them, at the broken floor, at the ghost on the screen, his face a landscape of pure torment. He was the first to crack, but not with words. He let out a strangled sound, a half-gasp, half-sob, and walked stiffly to the fireplace. He leaned his forehead against the mantelpiece, the same wood he'd touched as a boy waiting for Santa Claus, and his shoulders began to shake. It wasn't a performance. It was the real, ugly, unvarnished truth of his grief. And that sound, that raw, human sound of breaking, did what my clever words and staged videos could not. It chipped the ice. Brenda uncrossed her arms. Her hands, usually so steady, were trembling. She looked from Kyle's, heaving back to the relentless red numbers. 47, 32, 47, 31. "This is cruel," she whispered, but the anger was gone from her voice. It was just empty. "It's the point, Brenda," Mark said, but his usual smugness was absent. He sounded tired, defeated. "Don't you see? This was never about the money, not for him, not at the end. It was about this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. The silence, though the rot. "He's making us perform," Brenda shot back, but her heart wasn't in it. She was watching Kyle, and I think, for the first time, she was seeing her little brother, not a rival. "No," Kyle's voice was muffled against the wood. "He's giving us a chance to say what we should have said when he was alive." He pushed himself upright, turning to face them. His face was streaked with tears and grime. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. They weren't directed at anyone. They were just out there. A raw, general apology to the universe for his part in this mess. It broke the seal. Mark stopped packing. He looked at his shoes, then at the hole in the floor he'd made with his own hands. I am too." He let out a shaky breath. "I treated him like a client. I was managing his death. I'm a goddamn parasite." Brenda stared at him, her eyes wide. This was the first time she'd ever heard Mark admit to a flaw. It was more shocking than any of my revelations. The fortress walls were crumbling. 23:15, 23:14. The pressure was now on Brenda, the eldest, the rock. She had built her entire identity on being the strong one, the competent one, the one in control. An apology was an admission of failure. It was surrender. She clenched her jaw, her eyes glistening in the screen's light. She began, her voice tight, fighting for every word. I wanted what was best. I thought securing the money, managing the estate, that was my job. That was how I showed I cared, by making it efficient, clean. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through her perfectly applied makeup. She wiped it away violently. I didn't know I was making him feel like a burden. I didn't know I was making him feel unloved. It wasn't a direct "I'm sorry," but it was the truth. And in that room, at that moment, the truth was a more powerful currency. 00, 59, 00, 58. The clock was in its final minute. The three of them stood there, bound by a shared, devastating understanding. They had failed me. They had failed each other. And they were only just now, in this locked room, beginning to understand the cost. As the counter hit 00, 01, the screen changed. It wasn't a pre-recorded message this time. It was a live feed, black and white, from a camera I'd had installed in the room itself. They were staring at themselves, haggard and broken, on the monitor. And then my voice returned, but it was different, softer. The anger was gone. All that was left was a profound, weary sadness. An apology, I said, my recorded voice hushed. Not for the inheritance, for the absence, for the conversations you didn't have, for the hands you didn't hold. You just gave the first one, and it's the only thing I ever wanted from you at the end. The live feed on the screen zoomed in slightly, focusing on their three faces, captured in their shared moment of shame and clarity. You think I engineered this out of spite, I continued. And perhaps in the beginning there was some of that, a dying man's vanity. But this 72 hours, this was my final desperate act of love. I had to force you to see what you had become. I had to force you to look at each other without the filter of my money standing between you. Because I love you. Despite everything, I love you. Kyle sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Brenda didn't move, but the tears were flowing freely now, silent and unchecked. Mark just stared at the screen, his body slack with a new kind of understanding. The game is over, I said. The locks will disengage in 10 minutes. You are free to go. Your $1 each will be wired to your accounts. The house and everything else belongs to Sarah. There was a finality to it, a closing of a book. But I had one last thing to say, one last twist, not of the knife but of the key. However, I said, and I swear you could hear the faintest smile in my voice, there is a final clause, one I added just before I died, after I saw the footage of you in this room beginning to break. Sarah is not just my beneficiary. She is the executor of this, my final wish. And my wish is that she has the power in 1 year's time to reassess the distribution of the estate. All of it. They looked up, confusion replacing despair. She will watch you. Not in a creepy way, I added, and actually managed a weak, raspy chuckle. But she will see how you live your lives. If in the next year you can prove that the lessons of this house stuck, if you can live as a family, not as rivals, if you can prove that the real treasure wasn't in the coal chute or under the floorboards, but in each other, then she has my full authority and blessing to dissolve the trust and divide the estate equally between the three of you. The shock on their faces was absolute. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was disbelief. A pardon offered from the gallows itself. The treasure was always you, I whispered, my voice fatting. Your mother and I, our greatest treasure was always you. I had to make you remember how to be worth it. Don't let this be the end of our story. Make it a new beginning. The screen went dark for the last time. A few moments later, there was a series of loud, metallic clunks from the front and back doors. They were unlocked. They were free. No one moved for a long time. The outside world, with its lawyers and its conflicts and its temptations, was just beyond those doors. But in here, They were surrounded by the echoes of my voice and the physical proof of their failure. Kyle was the first to speak. "A year," he said, his voice hoarse. Brenda nodded slowly, wiping her face. "A year." Mark let out a long, slow breath. "What does that even look like, proving we're a family?" "I don't know," Brenda admitted, and for the first time it sounded like an admission, not a weakness. "But we have to try." They didn't leave immediately. They spent the next hour in a quiet, collaborative silence cleaning up. They moved the sleeping bags. They swept up the dust from the basement and the study. They couldn't fix the floorboards or the rose bush, not yet. Those scars would remain. But they tidied the wreckage. It was a start. When they finally walked out the front door, blinking in the morning sun, they didn't go their separate ways. They stood on the porch, the three of them, for a moment too long. Then Brenda turned to Kyle. "Do you want to get some coffee?" she asked, the invitation awkward, foreign on her tongue. Kyle looked at her, then at Mark, who gave a small, tentative nod. "Yeah," Kyle said. "Yeah, I'd like that." They walked down the path together. Not as allies, not yet, but not as enemies anymore either. They were just three bruised people, stepping out of a prison of their own making, with a key I had given them, but one they alone could choose to use. And that is the end of my story, the confession of Grandfather Sally. I got my revenge. I exposed their greed for all the world to see. But in the end, I like to think I also gave them something else. A chance. A seed. Whether it grows into something beautiful or withers in the cold light of their old habits, well, that's a story for them to write now. I am at peace, the score is settled, the lesson is taught. The rest is up to them.